So this happened to me on Halloween in 2001. 9/11 had just happened the month before, and unlike the Halloween the previous year, the streets this Halloween were nearly empty and devoid of children. The panic after 9/11 was real. For the sake of the story, my name is Jay, and at the time the story took place, I was 13 years old. My friend, who we'll call Seth, was 12 years old. A little old for trick-or-treating, but we both could pass for younger boys. We decided for trick-or-treating this year, we would do what we did the year prior, and go to this specific neighborhood not too far from where we lived. I need to give some context to help better understand this neighborhood first though. It's basically two different subdivisions that are divided up by a fairly large area of forestry. When you enter into this forestry, it can take about 20 minutes to walk through the trees to get to the other subdivision, so it's a decent trek from one side to the other. Also, the houses tend to fizzle out on both sides of the forestry, so no house on either side butts up to the forest line, except one. Just like last year, we decided to hop on our bikes and make the 15-minute bike ride out to the neighborhood. Before you get to the neighborhood, there was the pole we chained our bikes up at. We did this so we could trick-or-treat without the burden of our bikes looming over us. We finally made it into the neighborhood and all is well, making our way through the houses in the first subdivision. As we start getting closer to the forest line, we see that house, and on it sits a rocking chair on the porch. But we never saw anyone at this house before. It was a bit more dilapidated, and it needed some work on the siding and porch. They had an old Crown Vic sitting in the driveway. I believe it used to be white in color, but it was hard to tell with as much rust and paint chipping it had on it. We saw what looked to be an older man on the rocking chair, rocking back and forth, as the rocking chair made that oh so cliche creaking noise you hear in horror movies. I get a bad feeling and immediately tell Seth that we are not trying this house and should just head for the forest line, which he gave no objection to that. As we get closer to the house, the old man slowly stops rocking in the chair, slowly turning his head to look at us. His hair was a mess and frayed and just all over the damn place. Not saying a single word to us, his head locked onto us, slowly moving with every step we took closer to the forest line. This made me feel sick, as the feeling of danger started to creep in. As we passed the front of the house, we noticed a shorter person standing behind the screen door. We can't make this person out entirely either, just that they appear to be female. Both of their faces were obstructed by the dark of the night. She too had very disheveled hair and just like unkempt in general, from what I could see of her silhouette at least. We finally put some distance between them and us as we approached the forest line. Seth just gave me a look that I could only describe as pure terror. I told him it'd be okay and that we can finish filling our bags with candy and leave soon. It's late and they're old, so they'll probably be in bed before we cross back to the other side and make our way back to our bikes. He looked at me and just mumbled something like thank God under his breath. About halfway through the forest, we started hearing leaves crunching around us. At first we thought it to be an animal, but the steps didn't make sense. They were deliberate and with purpose. We started to get goosebumps on our skin and our hair started to stand on end. We picked up the pace a bit before I stopped abruptly and gestured to Seth that I noticed someone trying to crouch behind a tree just in front of us. Seth let out a gasp when he realized a shadowy figure just behind the tree as well. Tall, lanky build with frayed hair, unmistakable. We knew it was the same guy from earlier. We turned to one another, and without a word said, we both frantically booked it back in the direction of our bikes. We heard a third set of steps closing in on our heels, just as we close in on the forest line. We make it out unscathed and adrenaline still primed. We shoot a look back at the forest line and see the guy and woman standing at the edge of the forest line, and the man had what looked like a machete in his hand. That in and of itself gave another boost of adrenaline. Seth and I hurried back to our bikes and somewhat laughed it off for the rest of the week, until we saw on the news that a man and his wife were being charged in connection with 3 missing children cases. Even though it was dark that night and hard to see them, their mugshots confirmed it for us. The frayed hair and all the details were a match, not to mention when the cops raided their house, they found a machete. When I told Seth about it the next day at school, we were both in shock. I just can't imagine what would have happened had he caught up to us. I'm in my 30s now, and to this day that thought alone makes my skin crawl. This happened to me and my friend on Halloween. We were both about 10 years old. My friend and I always trick-or-treated together every year. Our parents all being close friends and whatnot. We always went to a nicer neighborhood to trick-or-treat like most people do. But we really liked this particular area, as the people here were known to be friendly, and they always had the best candy. We would usually go house to house while our parents stayed in the car. I remember the night going smoothly for the most part, but I do remember we came across one house in particular. The house didn't stand out or anything, but when I knocked on the door, more trick-or-treaters came up behind us by the time the owner had opened the door for us. It was an elderly couple and they looked nice, if not a bit creepy in their own right. They both looked homeless, yet they lived in the middle-class subdivision. They appeared greasy and unbathed, but without hesitation they greeted us as normal, and of course made us say trick-or-treat before they'd give us candy. But they did give us full-size Snickers and Twix bars, which was like striking gold for a kid. The night went on as normal, and we all went home shortly after. The horror didn't happen until we got home though. When we got home, the first thing I did was drop my bag and beelined it for the bathroom. While in the bathroom, I heard my parents say something like, "Oh my god," or something like that. I hurried back and I saw an open Snickers, torn in half on the glass table. Inside it was one of those X-Acto blades, the kind that you use in box cutters. My mom was screaming because while I was in the bathroom, she got a phone call from her friend, telling her to check our candy immediately because my friend bit into her candy bar before they got home to check the candy, biting directly into the blade. She was calling my mom on the way to the hospital to tell her as soon as she could. Years later, I got an update that those people are actually homeless and squatting in that house. They were arrested as far as I know. Moral of the story, check your child's candy. So this incident happened to me on Halloween 2016, during the insane clown craze. As a side note, I just want to say that I believe most people who dressed up as clowns in 2016 to scare people was most likely just that, to scare people. However, I believe my incident was far darker. I believe the clown that I encountered in the forest next to my school on this night was an actual serial killer, who was hiding behind the clown craze. We lived in a semi-rural area, so there was a decent amount of forest surrounding the school. Earlier that day, me and my friend Alyssa, name has been changed for obvious reasons, a longtime friend of mine whom I met doing track, this detail will be more important later, decided that we would dress up and hide behind bushes to scare the kids passing by. This happened by our school, where there were way more trick-or-treaters. This area had a reputation for handing out full-size candy bars, so as bad as it sounds, we preyed on this fact. We only had those faceless shadow costumes, nothing too crazy scary. We decided to get there a bit early to get set up and just be ahead of the trick-or-treaters. Fast forward to later in the night, which was fairly uneventful, only being able to scare like 3 kids. We decided we would be on our way back home, which was about a 30-minute walk from the school, if you cut through the forest line. This was nothing new to us though, we've been cutting through this forest line since like late grade school. But we both really wish we hadn't that day. Me and Alyssa approached a tree that looked like it had something on it. When we were right up on it, we started to realize that it was hair. Of course, we thought it was a wig. It's a common thing from prop stores this time of year. But I realized it was nailed to the tree. I gave Alyssa a weird look. She gave me one as well. As I was looking it over further, I noticed it was actually matted and kind of wet. I looked at my hand and realized that it was covered in blood after touching it. Alyssa looked at me and immediately swelled up in tears, saying something along the lines of, "Oh my god," under her breath or something. I urged her to call the police ASAP and to tell them that someone has been hurt in the forest by the school. As we're walking, she's trying to call the police, but with no luck. Cell reception was complete ass in this area. When we finally make it out of the forest line, we feel a bit better, although cell reception hadn't improved much. We started hearing a bullhorn behind us though, nearly breaking my neck to look behind us. We saw nothing, so we turned around and keep walking, but this time with a lot more pep in our step. We hear it again, but this time it was a lot louder. Without stopping, we give a look over our shoulders. We felt like we were being watched at this point, but we didn't see anyone. Then we heard it, the moment where time itself feels like it stopped. Rapid footsteps gaining on us from behind, followed by maniacal laughter, like whoever was doing this was having a grand old time scaring the fuck out of both of us. We just booked it in the direction of our houses. Not having very far to run and running track most of our lives, we were able to easily outrun the man. He looked to be a lot larger than us, and he had a very heavy step. We made it home without further incident. The police showed up and we gave a description/statement. Plus, they took samples of the blood still in my hand to test for DNA. The police knew we experienced something traumatizing and started going dad mode on us both about how we needed to be more careful and whatnot. But it goes without saying, we will never go back to that forest again.